Welcome to IFTF Foresight Talks. Sorry for the delay. We're going to get started right now. So feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. Tell us where you're joining from. We have Mary Doyle today. We are so excited for her. She is the founder of Rural on Purpose. So before we get to the conversation, I'm just going to go through some housekeeping. If you'd like, you can, while you're introducing yourself in the chat, feel free to tell us what is the most vivid and compelling image of rural futures you've seen from literature, Hollywood, science fiction, or elsewhere, just to get us started. Or you can just tell us your name, where you're from, who you're representing. But yeah, let us know what is the most vivid and compelling image of real futures, if you like. And so please use the chat, and while we're having the conversation, you can enter any insights that you're having, also any questions. You can also use the Q&A so that people can upvote your question. So that's that. Again, Mary Doyle, founder of Rural on Purpose. We're so excited to have her. And Jake as well is going to be hosting. He's the IFTF Research Director of the Governance Futures Lab. And just really quickly, IFTF, we are a 55-year organization, public interest organization. We do research, we have trainings, and all in the name of making organizations and individuals more future ready. This is our training portfolio. We have individual trainings for individuals, our Foresight Essentials, Design Futures, Scenario Building. We also have Coursera classes, which are you can take on your own time. They're asynchronous and recorded. We also have customized trainings for your team. So completely customized based on your needs, your goals, and who you are, we can customize for your organization. Here are upcoming trainings. We have an in-person one in Palo Alto coming. We also have online trainings. Please check our website for more. We also just announced a new Design Futures training in November and December. So our resources, we have all kinds of things, newsletters, we have alumni meetups. If you take a class, you are an alumni and you can join our exclusive meetups. So that is a perk if you're an alumni. We also have a Foresight Matters Medium channel, a thread. I don't know what you call it, but we're on Medium. And we also have an Urgent Optimist community, which is amazing. You can go to urgentoptimist.org. It is a fantastic community there that shares all sorts of things on an urgent optimism. And it's hosted by Jane McGonigal, the wonderful, and all kinds of really fun activities, scenarios, live simulations. Really recommend it. And finally, IFTF Vantage is our membership, our partnership that your organization can join, become a partner. You get a full year of continuous research. You have your own Foresight guide. You get invited to special events, and you have access to our Signals platform, Future Factors. So we have all kinds of wonderful things. Oh, you get 2 seats to trainings, that's included to any of our trainings. So it's a really great partnership and makes your organization future ready. So please join, and I will hand it over now to Jake, who is going to have a conversation with Mary Doyle. So thanks. Take it away, Jake.
Thanks, Aisha. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. We're very pleased to have Mary Doyle with us. As you might know, the purpose of this is really to learn from Mary and to learn from each other and to have a great conversation about some futures work that's ongoing now that is relevant, hopefully to you and to areas that you're working in. I'm already looking at this list of people coming in. Mary, you've brought out the Canadians, especially those from Saskatchewan. There's a very overrepresented number of people from Canada there, and actually just looking at this list, people from that you've pulled out people from different places that I think we would get in a quote unquote normal kind of foresight talk. So I think something about the rural subject is connecting with people that maybe they haven't had a place to talk about these things before. So I'm really looking forward to having this conversation. It's extremely important. We're the rural urban connection or disconnection. It's extremely important for the future, and we also don't have to frame everything in terms of urban with the rural. They have futures too, on their own terms. So those are some of the things we're going to talk about, the work you're doing, and I'm hoping we're going to have a great conversation for the time we have. And for this, about the first half will be Mary, and I'll ask a few questions, but just everyone be prepared, to interject and ask your own questions for the second half, because we really want to hear what you're interested in, what resonated with you, and keep the conversation going like that. So Mary, please, we'll start with where you're coming from, what you're working on, a little bit about yourself, and then dive into your work on Rural on Purpose and your work in Futures.
All right. I'm so excited about this. I'm so excited to see so many Canadians in this group. It's yay, Canada, go guys. And we have, a very, very big country with lots and lots of rural communities, and they are vibrant and they're doing amazing things. And, it's really great to be able to have this space to talk about them and talk about the future. So my background, I have a varied background, like most people do. I started in education as a high school English teacher for, first part of my career, and then ended up moving into entrepreneurship and had my own business for 9 years. And it was fantastic. It was an education business. And then I moved into economic development. And from there, I, was working with, I wasn't an entrepreneur per se at the time. I was working with entrepreneurs in entrepreneurial support. And that was really exciting and fulfilling, because I got to meet lots and lots of really interesting people in different parts of rural communities that had ideas about the future and what they wanted to build and what they saw in their communities. And it was a part of, at first it was a part of a government supported program called Enterprise Facilitation. And if you're ever interested in learning about it, it's a fantastic program that was started by an Italian economist by the name of Ernesto Ciroli. Some of you have heard of him. If you're interested, look up the TED Talk, Shut Up and Listen. That's what it's called. I'm not telling you to shut up and listen. I'm telling you that the TED Talk is called Shut Up and Listen. So if you Google that, you will find him. And he'll tell you all about the program that I ran in 14 municipalities. So I was in my car, I was driving across, hours and hours of distance every day to work at the kitchen tables with aspiring business owners and entrepreneurs. And it was a really wonderful program that the community supported, because there was a community council that met. I convened once a month that had people from, everyone from grandparents to business owners to counselors to everyone involved in this council would show up for this meeting, and I would present the needs and issues of 3 of the people that I had worked with that month. And they would just throw out all of their contacts and their Christmas card list of people who could help, and their ideas and their supports. And it was all anonymous. So you didn't know who the person was that you were supporting. You just knew they were in your community and they needed the support. And so everyone was generous with every resource that they had, and they came and they were interested in. It was just a fantastic program, and I would highly recommend anyone looking into that. From there, I moved into a regional economic development organization where I was the executive director, and we were looking more at technology companies and clustering industry players that were in our region and trying to help build capacity with and for them. So that was really great. But at that time, this is where I'm getting to Rural on Purpose. At at that time, it got to a point where, I felt that there were so many great solutions and so many great answers and resources for people who were doing like things all over the world and across, even cross borders, across our county and regional borders. And I didn't want to be restricted to only working with people that were part of that funding package. And I felt like the solution is a solution for everybody, and we got to figure out a way to share those solutions and spread that. So I started Rural on Purpose. I didn't know exactly where that was going to go, but Rural on Purpose became a community, and it became a global community of people that were engaged, and they were all. I thought, how am I going to start this? Where am I going to begin? So I started thinking about what I wanted to do and what I believed rural communities needed and what we were already doing. And I created a manifesto. So if I'm going to share my screen and show you that manifesto. Okay, can you see this, Jake?
Yes, there it is.
All right, there's our rural. This is how Rural on Purpose started. With a manifesto. We are fearlessly optimistic people living in rural communities. We believe that entrepreneurship is a vehicle for change and a mindset of growth. We don't fear the future. We have faith in it. Constraints are simply catalysts for innovation. Today, we have the opportunity to transform, augment, innovate, and connect like never before in history. We are changing the course of our rural communities with our own wit, wisdom, and ingenuity. We are living Rural on Purpose. And that was, so this is the call that I put out, and it was answered. It was answered by people from all over the world. And they started saying, this is exactly how I feel. Where do we go next? And so we started building this as a community, almost organically. I'm going to stop share. How do I do that? There. Okay, so we started doing that as a community, and we were building pilot programs to run in communities to test things like co-working, and we had a really great program we worked with 6 communities actually at one point right before COVID. The year before COVID hit, and we had 6 communities across the country working simultaneously in a 30-day challenge program where we created co-working spaces that didn't exist in their communities. And we created in 30 days, 89 co-working spaces that did not exist before. And it was fun, it was exciting, and truly rural, fit for purpose. We had everything from co-working spaces in salons where people were actually working at desks while they were having, pedicures. And we have pictures of people doing this. We had so many amazing things happen in those communities where we got to play and experiment with things. And so we did more of that. We continued doing more of that. And then COVID hit, and all of a sudden, that kind of activity stopped. And so we moved online more, and we were doing more activities and engaging with people in our networking events, our E2X events, and with Twitter chats and with webinars and that kind of thing. And then something amazing happened. I stumbled across a Coursera course, an IFTF Coursera course. Never heard of IFTF before. I didn't realize futures thinking or futurists was there was an actual discipline that, you could study. And so I went down that rabbit hole. I decided, okay, after taking all of the courses on Coursera, I think it's 6 of them, and, realizing this is a really important piece of what we're trying to do. With Institute for the Future, most of you know this, we talk about the foresight, insight, action cycle. We were working in the action part of that cycle already. We were building these futures and these programs, and we were piloting things, we were doing things. Entrepreneurs build the future. But we were missing that whole discussion piece beforehand, that whole, let's explore what's possible. Let's talk about what's possible, probable, preferable, where the wild cards might be. Let's really get into in a structured way, talking about that and exploring that. This was the perfect opportunity to build that in. And I started taking all the rest of the courses. And I think, Jake, as of yesterday, 2 days ago, I am certified in every single thing that IFTF offers. You're gonna have to create some new courses for me. And I'm trying to introduce that as much as I can into my work with rural communities. And so that leads me into the recent program that we're just finishing up now. We're actually the public presentation of it isn't till next week. So I'm kind of jumping ahead now with this one. I would have to be careful about some of the things that I'm addressing. But I got to work with cooperatives first in Western Canada. And it started with a podcast. They asked to interview me in a podcast, to talk about rural futures, because they knew that's what I was doing. And then their director of entrepreneurship, Heather, I think she's in the room. We started chatting about, well, what can we do? We need to do more of this, and how can we build something into what we're doing that addresses this in a structured way, and how do we bring futures thinking to our communities? And we built this program as an 8-week program that we ran with an invited guest list from Heather that was rural economic developers and municipal leaders and community leaders from across 4 provinces. And she brought them together, and they didn't all know each other. So this was a really great opportunity for them to connect as well. And we worked through the whole process of exploring the four alternative framework futures. So we use the alternative futures framework to explore rural communities in Western Canada and where that might go. So there was a whole introduction to futures thinking first. And then we moved right into, the second half of that program was exploring those alternative futures using that framework. And it was really, really exciting. I think that there are quite a few people, I'm hoping, that are in the room. I haven't really been watching the chat, but everybody was engaged. And we had almost everybody show up voluntarily for every one of these sessions that we did. We even had, and I'm not going to name names, but we had people that showed up from the airport for the session. They didn't want to miss it. They showed up, some people showed up while they were attending other conferences, and they had to duck out into the cloakroom to participate in this session. And we had, people were just really, really engaged, and it was really exciting because it was an opportunity to explore their communities in a new way, which is exactly how I felt. And so I'm there with like-minded people who have this energy and enthusiasm about their communities and see the opportunity to explore it differently. So I guess some of the things that I discovered when we were going through this process, some of the insights that I had were not surprising, but a little bit surprising when we were going through the initial activities. And we start by looking backwards in order to look forward. So we started to look at all of what they believe were the major impacts that impacted rural Western Canada over the decades and beyond. And so we started getting lots of stickies, tons and tons. The board was filled. The mural board that we used was filled with stickies. Lots of thought went into it. And there was very, very little on the board, even in the last decade, that was technology related. it was more social and more economic, but there was very, very little on the board that was related to technology. And I think from the courses that I've taken with mainly urban audiences, the work that we do starts and ends with technology. I mean, futures, you don't talk about futures without first envisioning some new technological advancement or some technology. And so this was really interesting. It was the starting point. Obviously we spent lots of time talking about technology later on, but that was not top of mind. And that was not what people believed had the greatest impact. And then when we took that apart and we broke it down a little bit more, and we started looking at the different categories, and we started looking at identifying. I wanted them to identify the impact that they felt, the thing that happened that they felt was going to have the greatest impact on present day rural Western Canada. So pick one. Which one out of all of these things? 3 came up. 3 that were we did dot voting. So we had lots of people putting dots on things. So it was easy to tell. Global warming, not surprising. COVID, not surprising. 2 biggest impacts. The 3rd biggest impact was the Indian Act of 1857. That was the 3rd most voted impactful event that happened that influences today, rural communities today in Western Canada. Now that's not something you could have predicted. And so when we started doing that, and then the work just flowed, and we started looking at, well, why, how, and we understand in Canada the impact of that document and the devastating impact that it's had, and the reconciliation work that's being done now, and still the trauma that needs to be healed, and all of but what we also know is that Indigenous communities in rural Western Canada play such an impactful role in the present and a greater role in the future. And you cannot discuss rural Western Canada without discussing that impact, because it's a growing demographic, is going to have a huge impact economically and socially and on everything in rural Western Canada. So that was a natural connection, and it was really interesting. We also realized that this was a participatory project, and we acknowledged that we didn't have everybody at the table. We didn't have Indigenous leaders at the table or community members at the table to envision this future together. So it turned out to be also more of an invitation to continue the work and expand that table and really truly look at a fulsome future and what that might look like. So with that acknowledgement, I have to acknowledge that it's a small group and a snapshot vision of what the future is going to look like in rural Western Canada, but limited. And so that was a really good place to start. We didn't have to go backwards. We started from there and said, this is the scope. This is where we're starting. This is where we can go. And we're not going to try and speak for anybody else. Those were all very interesting observations. And then we continued into the work. We finished up the project 8 weeks in. We ran a kind of a facilitated scenario. It's not the scenarios that were built at the end, but we also realized that much more is needed. We got to the end of this, and we realized we're now at a beginning point. So the beginning point is, okay, let's take some real scenarios that have come from all of this information and build them into something that you can workshop, that you can explore, and you can pull apart and you can't just drop them on people. And Jake, I learned that mostly from this past course, that whole difference between futurizing and becoming a futurist. And these documents would be futurist documents that would require some facilitation in order to make determine meaningful insights from them. There are no insights on their own without, they're really a catalyst for developing those insights and that future and where we're going to go with that. So it's part of my learning process as well, that's the next stage. So I have developed, and based on not just this, but based on the work that I've done in rural communities for years, and my own futurist practice work, pulled together and build a set of scenarios that I'll be sharing at a later point in time and doing some workshop development around.
Thank you, Mary. Okay, for some questions.
Absolutely, yeah.
I've got a ton. It's such an interesting trajectory and topic area and issues that you're working on. So I'll try to do this. A few of the things that came out to me. Well, one, the manifesto that you started off with is really fascinating. In a way, almost as I was reading it and you're reading it aloud, it was almost like a counterpoint to every stereotype of rural people. So optimist rather than pessimist, and entrepreneurship, sort of innovation rather than kind of stagnation and holding on to the past. Constraints as catalysts rather than, prisons, keeping you there. A lot of the assumptions about rural is like you have to escape from there, or you get out of that, or you go, it's nowhere and you're going somewhere. No fear of the future, So it's almost like you're talking against the kind of prevailing stereotypes or mindsets. And I wonder if that was intentional, that you were thinking about that, or how did you develop that manifesto, and what was the idea and the audience for that, and is another part of that question.
Well, Jake, that's where that alignment and recognition of the importance of futures thinking, where that resonated when I discovered it, because I wrote this in 2017, and it's been a calling for people. People say, I feel the same way. I am, I had people reach out to me from all over the world and say, that's me. You're talking about me and my community. And this is what, no one's talking like this. Let's all talk like this more. Let's discuss this. Let's explore some of these ideas. Let's be the positive people that we already are in our communities, and, grow that. So I think the problem, the interesting thing is, you didn't think that was something that this is counter to what you imagine rural communities to be like. And Jake, that's interesting to me to explore why that's happened. And if I can share my screen one more time, I want to show you something that I pulled up today. Okay, can you see this picture? Everybody identifies Midjourney pictures now. They know they have a look about them. But I typed in rural future. This is the image that I got from Midjourney. AI has just determined that this is rural future. It is based on everything that's out there on the internet, all the discussions, all of the headlines, all of the news, everything that it is collectively gathered to determine what rural futures look like, which means we have so much work to do, because the few people that we've gathered together around rural and purpose, around that manifesto, around that belief, is not enough. We have to be talking about this more, because this is what the internet, what AI believes from gathered real talks and information is rural future. If you look at this picture, it's just so wrong. It's so wrong. I don't know if that's supposed to be a dilapidated kind of solar panel on there, that thing that looks part art, part basketball net, kind of windmill in the background, doesn't make sense. The house is falling apart, it's crumbling. The truck, look at the truck, the future of rural. It's even got it backwards. It's got the front on the back, and it's it's just all kinds of wrong. This whole thing, and it looks like it's been mowed, the grass in this weird shape around the truck and leaving it there to sit. And it's an old truck. Like, I don't even know how this was generated as the future, but this is the future. Now I'm going to show you what the future of urban is. If I can just get this there. Urban future.
Oh, yes.
How's that for a difference? This is an urban future based on what has been collected and by AI to identify a future. It's very beautiful. It's very organic, lots of nature elements in it, lots of rural elements in it, but in a very, very positive way. And you don't have cars in there, and you have people walking, and it's a beautiful image. It's a beautiful vision of the future. That's the vision of the future that is already out there, and the one that we are dealing with, not so beautiful. And so it brings me back to that whole imperative. Like, it's an imperative that we start talking about the future and visioning it ourselves, and not I know that Institute for the Future talks about the easiest futures to imagine are the ones that where you're not successful, where it is a negative future, it is a negative outcome, and it's much harder to envision positive futures. And if it is, we need to start doing more of that now. We need to be working on that.
I'm going to ask one more, hopefully kind of pointed and direct questions about your use, and then we'll get into the audience questions. But when you're using, I mean, just to the point there, I mean, the kind of colonization of the future by the urban mindset or framing, like that's urban settings own the future. And as you say, even in a sort of beautiful green future, it's almost like they're usurping the best of rural into the urban landscape, and then rural still left behind in any of those scenarios. So I just wondered about, like, you're talking about how it's easier to imagine collapse maybe, but in the workshops that you were doing with people on the ground and using the 4 futures, which is, one is a continued growth story, one's a collapse archetype, one's a constrained or disciplined archetype, another one is transformation. Was that reflected in the interactions you had there? Did they immediately go to assuming collapse, or, were transformation stories just as vibrant and compelling for people?
That's a great question, Jake. Thank you. And that's why I think that when I said, I think this is the beginning of the work that we need to do, because you saw the pictures. This isn't just me saying this. I think that is really, really a difficult thing to get to. And you need a lot more time and a lot more attention, a lot more focus on it. I think that the official future for rural communities, whatever your rural community official future is, it is so much of a block that it is really, really difficult to even get past to a point where you allow yourself to imagine anything, whether it's positive or negative or anything, because that official future, it's in a binder. It's in a binder. It's on your shelf, and you update it every 4 years, whether you like it or not. And it is something that's holding holding people in place, I think, in rural communities. And I think that it becomes such a stretch and such a hard thing to take people beyond the present. It is a block. It is absolutely a block. And even the most positive, the most forward thinking people, the people that are optimists that want to envision all of this, they struggle with it too, because they're in jobs where they have to triage. They're in jobs where they have to look at, what is it that we've got? What resources do we have? What do we have? What are we going to do with them? And, you know, where are the urgent concerns? They don't have the luxury of working up here and, you know, considering those things when they have to spend that money and that time and those resources on the things that are absolutely necessary today. And I'm looking for some answers too, and I'm trying to explore that, but I'm also trying to be gentle, because it's not an empathetic, because it's not something where you can blame people for triaging in your community when that's your job. And if you don't do it well, people are going to suffer.
I love the story about the 3 priorities or the ranking, and it just made me think how there's a positivity to be connected to deep time and understanding. Yeah, this policy of 1857 still resonates through. They still feel it, you know, in a present way. It's not left behind. In a sense, an urban future, urban mindset can erase, elide. You're moving, you know, you're always moving forward. And in some sense, the weight of history is very heavy sometimes in rural situations. There's a couple questions that are related. You know, you may be able to expand upon related to themes you've already talked about. Two that I'm going to mention here. One is from German Sanchez. It says, "Congrats, Mary. Got a question here. The manifesto relies on a growth mindset. Since technology isn't a concern, I wonder if you tackled degrowth interest in rural communities involved." And then we have another question from the Q&A side. It says, "How is related? I think." How is climate change, resiliency and adaptation, sustainable agriculture, and community taught and fostered in your outreach? So that sort of non-growth, how do you deal with that, or degrowth or sustainability? You know, how are those themes coming up in your work?
Those are great questions, and they came up a lot. We talked about we spent a lot of time talking about rural communities dealing with the fact that we're always behind. We're never going to be caught up. The infrastructure it doesn't matter if we get, you know, in terms of technology, if we get digital access that's universal, we're never going to have parity. It's never going to be up to date with everything that is happening from urban where it's coming from. So how do we deal with the fact that we are always going to be behind? Maybe not every community, but in general. And then we came around. Some of the people in the groups were saying, maybe we need to take a leadership role in not trying to be ahead, not trying to catch up, not identifying as behind, just do our thing. And maybe that degrowth is, you know, a potential for a scenario. In fact, I created 4 very distinct scenarios, 4 archetypal scenarios. The constraint scenario is a degrowth scenario. So I will be sharing that, and I will be doing some workshops with anyone who's interested in joining that conversation. So I hope that you do, people who ask that question, because it is absolutely, I created a degrowth scenario based on that. It's a constraint scenario.
Well, I think you have 42% of Canada present here for this webinar, so that's good. You've got a good audience for that. I know, you know, I love this, you know, everything is framed in terms of urban, rural, that relationship. The idea of do your own thing is very powerful. You know, the identity of, like, we don't have to look, you know, to somewhere else as our future. We actually have our own future. We're not just sort of always following behind. And so I love that. Also, you know, just the fact that a lot of people, when they're unhinged, released from urban settings because of COVID, and they could work remotely, went out into rural places often. You know, so they were actually seeking. It's sort of interesting, if they weren't anchored, you know, in cities, they were actually their future looked brighter by leaving the city. So that COVID certainly changed some of that storyline and dynamic as well. A couple more questions here. So from Alexander Sorokin, living in a rural area in old-fashioned ways is a hard full-time job, 24/7, and a great deal of responsibility for family, for house, for land, for animals, and so on. Are city dwellers about it, and how will they adapt to it? I guess that's sort of kind of what I was saying here. If there's a movement back out, I mean, he says it's not visiting a nice vacation house. There needs to be a mindset transformation. So yeah, some of that dynamics of, rural communities being, I won't say flooded, but certainly more populated in some sense by city dwellers who are coming out now, and the mindset of those folks coming out. Some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've talked about that. I've written about it in some blogs, and I've talked about it quite a bit. And yeah, it's posing some new discussions and creating new tensions, and it's doing a lot of things. There's some good things and bad things. There's new money coming in. There's new life that's coming in. But then, there's the gentrification that's happening in a lot of the communities, and people are, we have this, expression that, a lot of people are driving. It's called drive to qualify. And so people who are looking for home ownership that can't afford home ownership anywhere near urban centers keep driving out until they find a house that they can actually afford a mortgage for with. So it's not necessarily, I chose that rural community that I want to engage with and be a part of and join and, participate in. I'm there because I want a home. And so then those homes, were less supply for the people who are already in the rural communities, and they have to keep moving out. So they're displaced. There's a displacement that's happening all over the place, and there's a trickle effect. And that trickle effect is definitely impacting a lot of rural communities.
It's so funny. I've been to since COVID, many places like Hawaii and Mexico City, and I hear that there's almost the same story even in the cities, is that we're so tired of rich North Americans driving up prices and driving us out of our homes, basically because of COVID, they can live everywhere else. So it's almost like this weird movement and diaspora of people that's causing other displacements, causing resentment, even more resentment, and not even in always rural settings. It's other cities as well. And so that kind of churn that's happening, it's really interesting to see those kind of in-group, out-group dynamics that are emerging there. Two questions. I'm going to ask them both because I think you may be able to answer them in a related way. So Jennifer Brooks asked, with much political discussion focused on urban, can you touch on how this affects rural policy and perspectives, and how rural areas may be addressing this divide? And then Keith Young asked, how do we facilitate conditions that most effectively disrupt the constraining official rural futures?
Can you read the last one again?
Yeah, how do we facilitate conditions that most effectively disrupt the constraining official rural futures? Maybe they're not exactly related, but the first one, again, with much discussion focused on urban, can you touch on how this affects rural policy and perspectives, and how rural areas may be addressing this divide?
Well, I think with the first question, everyone's dealing with it slightly differently, depending on what your reality is and how close you are to that center, whatever that urban center is, and whatever that impact is. So there's that, if you're on the perimeter of it, you're going to have very different issues than somebody who's remote, living in a remote community. So, you've heard this, everyone in this room has heard the expression, if you've been to one rural community, you've been to one rural community. That's, you think you know them, but you know one. They're all different. And I think it's the same thing with rural policy. In terms of addressing that futures thinking piece, I spend a lot of time thinking about that, because that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to evangelize it and try and bring it into rural communities in a way that is sustainable, in a way that's not going to be threatening, in a way that is going to be impactful. And one of the things I did, and I guess an archetype of the future, one of the things that we talk about, building things that don't exist yet, I created a job description for a futurist in rural communities, and broke it down into all of the roles that you would play, what your job duties would be, what your experience would need to be. And I actually wrote a document, a job document. And I did that for myself. And my husband said, I'm like, how would I do this? How do I go about doing this? And he said, because he hires people all the time. And he said, well, create a document. Here's a document framework for a job. If you're going to create a new job, write one for yourself and then do it. So that's what I'm trying to do. So I don't have a complete answer for that right now, but stay tuned because I'm working on it.
I'm just curious. I know you can't go, you're going to release everything else, so you don't want to, share too soon, but I'm just curious, like what were some of the kind of narrative hooks of the transformation story for rural?
Yeah, I can tell you that with the themes that I wrote the scenarios around, the transformation story is a transformation of municipal governance. It's a transformation of that because it came up in all of our discussions that there is an apathy. I'm not sure exactly what's happening, but we have so many acclamations in rural community municipalities that we just don't have new leadership coming up. And like I've joked about it and said, we got to find a way to let these poor people retire so that they don't have to keep coming back, because there's nobody else who wants to run in local politics and take on those roles. And we talked about the complexity of the job that is changing. We've talked about all the reasons why municipal governance is not something that's attractive to people. So we've identified all those. So the transformation story is a transformation of that. So if you want to learn about that, I am happy to take you through that scenario and look at what you can actually do and look at what insights might be generated from that.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of interesting to me too. I mean, I live in Austin, and there is a real and increasingly hostile relationship between the state government and the city, and preempting laws and everything else. I just wonder, was there part of a discussion? I mean, in that sense, rural representation and state dominates state government here in many states, in the U.S. And I just wonder if there is a discussion about, we think about this as urban first and dominating, and rural, and the power lies in the urban centers, but there is a pretty plausible story where rural dominates the urban, and that was kind of the dynamic that I'm talking about there. Did that ever come up, or do you see a future where that dynamic plays out, where the kind of rural mindset, rural political power overrides a lot of urban? That
not in these conversations, but it has in other conversations I've had with people, and I've explored that for years. I talked about that in a number of different presentations about that possibility before futures thinking. So, but the constraint scenario that I built has that dynamic as well.
Yeah. We have a question from Jacqueline Beretta. Do you have to adapt the future vocabulary and concepts to this 8 weeks experience with a rural audience or participants?
8 weeks is not a long time to get all of that in, and so we had to kind of find the basics and talk about futures thinking in introductory steps and introductory ways, but it didn't change it didn't lessen the impact at all. What it did was it resonated, and I think people want more, and I'm hoping they want more, because there's so much more to do, and there's so many more places to go with this. Just understanding signals of change and drivers of change. That was that was like a transformation moment in the room, because all of a sudden you start going, there's evidence of potential futures that I hadn't considered that's right here around us. And you can get addicted when you get into this, you can get addicted to looking for those signals of change. But then it's, what do you do with them? You pull them together. And what I wish I could have done more with the group in terms of signals of change would be to start combining them in new and unexpected ways. We did that once for one exercise. It went really well. And I wish we had more time to do that, because, that's where you start seeing possibilities, and you can tie it to something that's concrete.
Yeah, I like the way you're talking about futurizer and futurist, because in a sense, okay, futurizing rural communities means, broadband access, or there's some of the sort of typical things, digitization or access to certain things, mostly technological. It's like technifying, you're futurizing in a sense, but making rural communities and rural people futurists. I mean, there is a formation of being a futurist that you can also be a Luddite, in terms of, in a positive sense, in terms of understanding the relations of humanity to machines and technologies, and maybe a more balanced and a more human uplifting relationship, in that sense of a Luddite, where we're not dominated by machines. So you can be a futurist and maybe in some sense you have a better sense of that power dynamic, those relations. Maybe you choose the kind of relations and the relationship you have with technologies and machines in a more concerted way. So I like the idea. Rural community as futurist doesn't just mean add technology to the mix.
No, not at all. And that's one of the insights from all of the work that I've been doing. And it's a perspective and understanding there is a very, very different fundamental perspective, and understanding that there is not, like you said, there's an opportunity to grow that. There's an opportunity to take that and develop maybe even a whole new field of futures thinking, that is kind of talking about that rural future, and maybe formalizing it a little bit. I've got some scenarios that do that, and they're good starting points to explore where else can you go with this new dynamic.
Well, you said you've taken all the IFTF courses and we need more, and I was going to throw it back to you to say you developed a rural futures course, and we'll run it with you. So that's the next step. Yeah. Maybe we have time for one, maybe two. Let's see. Kelly Cornett Weber asked, what has been surprising about your experience engaging rural community members in futures thinking? Were there any assumptions you unconsciously brought to this work that have since been challenged?
Yep. That's a great question. And since I have been exploring it with them, I start out my presentations, not this one, but I start out my presentations with this little statement, because there's always a skeptic in the room, and there are always people who are going to push back on you, and you might as well just get it out in the open before you even start. So I say, I try to play the role of the people in the room that may be skeptics. I said, wow, this is pretty dramatic. If I've shared a scenario or something pretty dramatic, I did the imagination exercises, and maybe I stretched my thinking about what's possible, but I'm not convinced. And we're already stretched for time and resources in our community, and we're up to our eyeballs dealing with present day problems. Never mind the problems of tomorrow. That's a luxury we simply don't have. It's another argument. Another argument is, you said yourself it's impossible to accurately predict the future. So isn't it just a waste of time? Another argument. Oh, by the way, how do you even measure it? That's the biggest one. How do you measure it? How do you measure this? And it just doesn't feel practical to me. It's more play than it is serious. And some people will even say we're already investing in the arts. And so I deal with those right off the bat, and let's put them on the table and say, how did I do? Did I get anybody? Is there anybody in the room that feels this way? And, let's talk about that. You have to do that. You have to do that with any conversation that I have. You have to identify the what's in it for me with your community members. If you can answer those questions, you'll have their attention, and you can actually work through something and get to something positive and new.
Okay, well, I think we are wrapping up. I want to give you the last few seconds. If there's anything that hasn't been said or you want to share or a plug for anything, floor is yours to wrap us.
Let me see. If anyone wants to be involved in the scenario work that we're going to be doing with these rural scenarios, please sign up for my email messages, and I won't spam you at all, and I don't sell anything, or it's just a sign up sheet to let me know if you're interested in exploring or being involved in any of the future activities that we're going to be engaging in. And my website is, the landing page is just marydoyle.ca. And then you can sign up for that, and we can continue having some really great discussions about some of the scenarios that were built and where we might go.
Well, I expect you'll be getting a lot of signups. And thank you so much for your time, Mary, and your work. It's really exciting. It's really necessary. And I know it's just really at the start of it. So can't wait to see how it develops over time. So thank you again for joining us.
Jake, thank you so much. And Aicha, thank you again. Thank you both for inviting me and for being such amazing teachers and being part of such a worthwhile organization. If anything, my last message would be to anybody in the room that's interested in futures thinking, please consider taking some of their courses, because it is so important to the future of rural that we have more futurists out there. And we need networks of them, lots of them. And it's amazing training and an amazing tribe of people to be a part of. So that's my plan.
We of course love it. Thank you, Mary. Great message. And thanks everybody for joining, for giving us your time, and we'll see you next time.